I didn't plan on writing this. It started because I opened my pantry last month and realized half of what I bought last year was already expired, and the other half will outlast me. That gap made me start digging. Most people have no idea how wide that gap actually is between what food companies print on the label and what the food can actually survive. Nobody talks about this, but expiration dates on most shelf-stable food are not safety deadlines. They are liability dates. Once you understand that difference, you start looking at your kitchen completely differently. Here's the tension. Prices keep climbing, supply chains keep getting shakier, and most people are still throwing out food that was perfectly fine while ignoring the stuff that actually can protect them long-term. That's backwards, and I want to fix that for you today. Somewhere between number 4 and number 8, I'm going to tell you about one item that genuinely shocked me when I found out how long it lasts. You will not believe number 6. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. Just keep that number in your head. If food security and smart budgeting matter to you, subscribe now, because this channel is going to keep digging into the things nobody else is explaining clearly. Let's get into it. I organized this list from foods that last a long time to foods that basically don't die. Some of these you already have in your kitchen right now without knowing what you're sitting on. Others you're going to want to add to your next shopping trip. Let's start. Item number 1. White rice. White rice is the first thing most preppers and budget shoppers mention, and for good reason. This one surprised me with how boring and reliable it is. White rice, stored properly, can last 25 to 30 years. The reason is simple. The bran and germ have been removed, which are the parts of the grain that go rancid. What's left is mostly starch, and starch doesn't spoil the way fat does. Industry storage guides from long-term food suppliers consistently rank white rice near the top of any shelf life list. Retail data also shows white rice sales spike every time there's a supply chain scare because people instinctively know it holds up. I bought a 25-pound bag of white rice 2 years ago just to test this myself. I sealed half of it the cheap way, in the original bag inside a plastic bin, and vacuum sealed the other half. Both are still fine so far, but the vacuum-sealed portion smells fresher when I open it. If you're stocking rice, buy it in bulk when it's on sale, and repackage it into food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers if you can. Keep it somewhere cool and dry, away from direct light. Even without perfect storage, plain white rice will outlast almost everything else in your kitchen. This is one of those foods where a small investment now protects you for decades. That's not panic, that's just math. Item number 2. Raw honey. Honey is the item everyone mentions, but almost nobody actually understands. This one is quietly one of the most impressive foods on the planet. Honey has such low moisture content and such high acidity that bacteria and microorganisms simply cannot survive in it. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that was still edible after thousands of years. That's not a myth, that's documented. Food historians and archaeological reports reference this repeatedly whenever ancient food preservation comes up. It's one of the most cited examples in the entire field. When I first heard this, I assumed it was one of those internet facts that gets exaggerated. So I looked into how honey actually crystallizes over time. Crystallized honey isn't spoiled at all, it's just changed texture, and you can warm it gently to bring it back to liquid form. I've done this myself with a jar that sat in my cabinet for over 3 years. If you're buying honey for storage, buy raw and unfiltered if you can, and keep it sealed at room temperature. Don't refrigerate it, since cold actually speeds up crystallization. A little crystallization is normal and doesn't mean it's gone bad. Honey is one of the few foods you can genuinely call a forever food, and that alone makes it worth having on hand. Item number 3. Dried beans. Dried beans get overlooked because they feel old-fashioned, but that's exactly why they're so powerful for long-term storage. Properly dried and sealed beans can last 20 to 30 years, similar to white rice. The key factor is moisture. As long as beans stay dry, the protein and starch inside them stay stable for an extremely long time. Extension officers and food science departments that study shelf-stable staples consistently list dried beans alongside rice and wheat as top-tier long-term storage items. This isn't new information. It's just information most people never see because it's not marketed to them. I switched from canned beans to dried beans mostly to save money, and only later realized the storage benefit was even bigger than the price benefit. I keep several varieties: black beans, pinto, kidney, just for variety, and I rotate the oldest bags to the front so I actually use them. If you're storing beans, keep them in airtight containers away from moisture and consider mylar bags with oxygen absorbers for true long-term storage. Older dried beans do take longer to cook and soften, so don't panic if a very old bag needs an extra hour on the stove. This is a food where patience in cooking is the only trade-off for decades of shelf life. Item number 4. Pure maple syrup. Maple syrup surprised me because I always assumed it was closer to a produce item, something that goes bad relatively fast. That assumption was wrong. Unopened, pure maple syrup can last indefinitely due to its high sugar concentration, which behaves similarly to honey in terms of preventing bacterial growth. Once opened, it lasts a very long time in the fridge, often years past what people expect. Producers and syrup industry guides note that sugar content is what protects the product, not preservatives, since real maple syrup typically has none. I had a bottle of maple syrup in my fridge that I genuinely forgot about for almost 2 years. When I found it, I expected mold. Instead, it just had some sugar crystals forming at the bottom, which is completely normal and just means the sugar is settling out of the liquid. If you want to stock maple syrup, buy the real thing, not the corn syrup blends, since pure syrup has better preservation properties. Store opened bottles in the fridge and don't worry about crystallization. It's just sugar reorganizing itself. This is a small comfort item that quietly lasts far longer than people assume, which makes it a great thing to have a backup bottle of. Item number 5. Powdered milk. Powdered milk doesn't have a great reputation, mostly because people remember a bad glass of it from decades ago. But the shelf life story here is genuinely strong. Properly stored powdered milk can last 20+ years when kept in a low oxygen, low moisture environment. The removal of water is again the key factor, since bacteria need moisture to grow and multiply. Long-term food storage companies and dairy science sources both point to powdered milk as one of the most reliable calcium and protein sources for extended storage, specifically because of how stable it is once dehydrated. I tested a can of powdered milk that had been sitting in a relative's basement for years. The taste wasn't identical to fresh milk, a little flatter, a little less rich, but it was completely usable in cooking and baking without anyone noticing a difference. If you're stocking powdered milk, buy it in sealed cans rather than resealable bags if long-term storage is the goal, since cans keep oxygen and moisture out more effectively. Use it in recipes like baking or sauces first, where flavor differences matter less. Having a reliable dairy substitute on the shelf is one of those quiet safety nets people don't think about until they need it. Item number 6. Salt. You won't believe this is the one I teased earlier, but salt genuinely changed how I think about my kitchen. It's the most boring item on this list, and also the most permanent. Salt does not expire. Ever. It's a mineral, not an organic compound, which means there's nothing in it to break down, oxidize, or spoil. Iodized salt can lose some potency in the iodine over extremely long periods, but the salt itself remains completely safe and usable forever. Food safety agencies and mineral science sources are consistent on this point. Salt has an effectively infinite shelf life, and any date on the container is purely a manufacturer suggestion, not a safety requirement. I genuinely laughed when I confirmed this, because I had been treating my salt like every other pantry item, checking dates, rotating stock, being careful. None of that was ever necessary. It just sits there, permanently useful, for the rest of my life and beyond. If you're building a long-term pantry, salt should be one of your first purchases, since it's cheap, permanent, and essential for both cooking and food preservation methods like curing and pickling. Buy more than you think you need, because it will never go to waste. This is the item that made me realize how much of what we're told about expiration is really about liability, not actual food safety. Item number 7. Granulated sugar follows a similar logic to salt, and once you understand one, the other makes a lot more sense. Properly stored granulated sugar has an indefinite shelf life. Like honey and maple syrup, it's the low moisture, high concentration environment that prevents anything from growing in it. Sugar can clump over time if it absorbs humidity, but clumping is a texture issue, not a safety issue. Baking industry sources and food science references both describe sugar as one of the most storage-stable pantry items that exists, right alongside salt. I once found a bag of sugar that had turned into a solid brick from humidity exposure. I assumed it was ruined. A few minutes with a rolling pin, and it was back to normal, fully usable in baking with zero issues. If you're storing sugar long-term, keep it in an airtight container to prevent clumping, and don't worry if it does clump anyway, since it's still perfectly good. This is one of the cheapest, most permanent items you can stock. Between salt and sugar, you're covering two of the most fundamental flavor and preservation tools in your kitchen, and neither one will ever expire on you. Item number 8. Distilled white vinegar. Vinegar is one of those ingredients people use constantly without ever thinking about its shelf life, mostly because they never have to. Distilled white vinegar has an acidity level that makes it essentially self-preserving. It doesn't support bacterial growth, and over time, it may develop a slightly different flavor profile or a cloudy appearance, but it remains safe to use for cooking, cleaning, and preserving other foods. Vinegar producers and food preservation guides consistently note that vinegar is one of the only pantry liquids that improves your ability to preserve other foods, which makes it a kind of multiplier item in a long-term pantry. I use vinegar constantly for pickling vegetables from my own garden, and I've never once had a bottle go bad on me, even ones that sat unused for well over a year after opening. If you're stocking vinegar, keep a variety on hand: white vinegar for cleaning and basic cooking, and something like apple cider vinegar for flavor. Store away from direct sunlight to preserve color and taste over time. This is an item that does double duty, since it not only lasts forever itself, but it helps you preserve other foods too. Item number 9. Hardtack and dense crackers. This one feels almost historical, but it's had a real resurgence, and once you understand why, it makes complete sense. Hardtack is a simple flour, water, and salt cracker that was used by sailors and soldiers for centuries because of its extreme shelf life, sometimes decades when stored correctly in a dry environment. Modern preppers have brought it back specifically because it requires no refrigeration and almost no ingredients. Historical military records and modern survival food guides both reference hardtack as one of the original long-term ration solutions, predating almost every other item on this list by hundreds of years. I tried making a batch myself just out of curiosity: flour, water, salt, baked until completely dry. It's not exactly delicious on its own, but soaked in soup or coffee, it becomes soft and completely edible, exactly the way it was used historically. If you want to try this, keep it extremely dry during baking and storage, since moisture is the only real threat to hardtack's shelf life. It's a good backup carbohydrate source that requires almost no cost to produce. This is one of the oldest tricks in food preservation, and it still works exactly the way it did centuries ago. Item number 10. Freeze-dried fruits and vegetables. Freeze-dried food has quietly become one of the fastest growing categories in the entire grocery industry, and once you see the shelf life numbers, you understand why. Freeze-drying removes almost all moisture from food while preserving most of its structure, nutrients, and flavor. Properly packaged freeze-dried fruits and vegetables can last 25 years or more, compared to just a few days for their fresh counterparts. Retail trend reports have flagged freeze-dried food as one of the fastest growing pantry categories over the past few years, driven largely by increased consumer interest in food security and long shelf life options. I bought a bag of freeze-dried strawberries mostly as a snack, and only later realized I was sitting on something with an incredible shelf life. They taste surprisingly close to fresh once rehydrated, and even dry. They work great in cereal or as a trail snack. If you're building a long-term pantry, freeze-dried produce fills a nutritional gap that grains and legumes can't cover on their own. Store in a cool, dark place and prioritize resealable Mylar packaged options if you're not consuming it quickly. This is the modern answer to something humans have been trying to solve for thousands of years, keeping fruits and vegetables usable without them rotting. Item number 11. Dried pasta. Pasta feels like an everyday item, but its shelf life is genuinely underrated compared to how people treat it. Dried pasta made from durum wheat and water without eggs can last 1 to 2 years past the printed date with no real quality loss, and much longer than that in a truly sealed, cool environment. The low moisture content again does most of the work here. Manufacturer guidelines and food science sources both indicate that plain dried pasta is one of the more forgiving shelf-stable carbohydrates, especially compared to egg-based or fresh pasta varieties. I found a box of pasta pushed to the back of my cabinet almost 3 years past the date on the box. I cooked it up expecting something off, and it was completely normal. Same texture, same taste. If you're stocking pasta, choose plain durum wheat varieties over egg noodles, since eggs shorten shelf life significantly. Keep it sealed and dry, and rotate older boxes to the front so you use them before buying new ones. This is one of the easiest, cheapest ways to build a long-lasting carbohydrate base in your pantry without any special equipment or storage method. Item number 12. Whole wheat berries. Wheat berries are the whole, unprocessed wheat kernel, and this is where grain storage gets genuinely impressive. Whole wheat berries, stored properly in a sealed, oxygen-free environment, can last upward of 30 years. Because the kernel is intact, the natural protective coating helps prevent the oils inside from going rancid, unlike flour, which spoils much faster once ground. Agricultural storage research and long-term food organizations consistently identify whole grain kernels as some of the most durable food storage options available, specifically because grinding is what shortens shelf life, not the grain itself. I bought a hand grinder specifically because of this fact, since it means I can store wheat almost indefinitely and only grind it into flour right before I need it. That single change extended my flexibility dramatically compared to just stocking bags of flour. If you're serious about long-term grain storage, buy whole kernels rather than pre-ground flour and invest in a simple hand or electric grinder. Store the kernels in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers for maximum shelf life. This is a slightly more advanced strategy, but it unlocks decades of shelf life instead of just months. Item number 13. Canned meats and fish. Canned protein gets a bad reputation for taste, but the shelf life story here deserves more attention than it gets. Properly canned meats and fish, like canned chicken, tuna, and salmon, can remain safe well beyond their printed dates, often 5 to 7 years or more, as long as the can itself stays intact with no rust, dents, or swelling. The canning process itself is what creates the long shelf life, not any added preservative. USDA food safety guidance has long stated that commercially canned foods remain safe indefinitely as long as the can is not damaged, even though quality may gradually decline over time. I went through my pantry and found canned salmon 2 years past its date. I checked the can carefully for damage, found none, and it was completely fine. Tasted just like a newer can I compared it to. If you're stocking canned protein, always check cans for dents, rust, or bulging before use, since that's the real safety indicator, not the printed date. Rotate stock so older cans get used first, and store in a cool, dry place to slow any quality decline. This is one of the most accessible ways to keep real protein on hand without needing a freezer or any special equipment. Item number 14. Baking soda. Baking soda is one of those items sitting quietly in every kitchen that nobody thinks about until they need it. Baking soda, properly sealed and kept dry, has an extremely long shelf life for its intended non-food uses, like cleaning and odor absorption, essentially indefinite. For baking purposes specifically, Its leavening power can weaken slowly over a few years, though it remains safe to consume well beyond that. Manufacturer testing and food chemistry sources note that baking soda's structure is stable, and what changes over time is potency for chemical reactions, not safety. I tested an old box of baking soda against a fresh one using the vinegar fizz test, and while the old box reacted slightly slower, it still worked fine in a batch of biscuits with no noticeable difference in the result. If you're relying on baking soda for actual baking, do a quick fizz test with vinegar before using an old box in a recipe you care about. For cleaning or odor control, age genuinely doesn't matter at all. This is a $2 item that quietly does double duty in the kitchen and around the house for years at a time. Item number 15, cornstarch. Cornstarch rarely gets attention because people only think about it during holiday cooking season, but its storage profile is excellent. Cornstarch, kept dry and sealed, can last indefinitely for practical purposes. It's a pure starch with almost no moisture, which means there's nothing for bacteria or mold to use as fuel. Food science references consistently place pure starches like cornstarch among the most storage-stable ingredients in any kitchen, similar to sugar and salt in terms of durability. I had a box of cornstarch that had been in my cabinet so long I couldn't remember buying it. It thickened a sauce exactly the way a new box would. No clumping, no odd smell, nothing. If you're storing cornstarch, just keep moisture out. That's really the only variable that matters. A sealed container or the original box in a dry cabinet is more than enough. This is a low-cost, high-value item for thickening sauces, soups, and gravies, and it will be ready whenever you need it, no matter how long it's been sitting there. Item number 16. Instant coffee. Coffee feels like it should go stale fast, and fresh ground coffee does lose flavor quickly, but instant coffee tells a very different story. Instant coffee, sealed and kept away from moisture, can remain usable for 20 years or more. The freeze-drying or spray-drying process used to make it removes the moisture that would otherwise allow oils to go rancid or mold to develop. Coffee industry sources note that instant coffee's processing method is specifically what gives it such a dramatic shelf life advantage over ground or whole bean coffee. I kept an unopened jar of instant coffee as a backup for years without thinking about it, and when I finally opened it, the flavor was a little flatter than a fresh jar, but completely drinkable and honestly fine once mixed with milk or sugar. If caffeine matters to you in a long-term pantry plan, instant coffee is a far better choice than ground coffee for storage simply because of how much longer it lasts. Keep it sealed and in a cool, dry spot. This is a small comfort item that people underestimate, but having a reliable caffeine source can matter more than people expect during any kind of disruption. Item number 17. Hard liquor. This one surprises people because they assume all alcohol has some kind of expiration concern, but distilled spirits are a different category entirely. Hard liquor, like whiskey, vodka, rum, and similar high-proof spirits, does not spoil once bottled and sealed, because the alcohol content itself prevents bacterial or microbial growth. Unopened, it can sit for decades with no meaningful change. Opened bottles can slowly lose some flavor complexity from oxidation, but they don't become unsafe. Beverage industry references consistently describe distilled spirits as having no true expiration date once bottled, unlike beer or wine, which do change more noticeably over time. I have a bottle that was a gift years ago that I never opened, and out of curiosity, I compared it to a fresh bottle of the same brand. The flavor was nearly identical, just very slightly mellower. If you're thinking about this as part of a long-term pantry, hard liquor also has practical uses beyond drinking, including as a barter item, a disinfectant in a pinch, or a base for homemade extracts. Store it upright, away from heat and light. This is one of those items that quietly holds both practical and social value for a very long time. Item number 18. Dehydrated vegetable flakes and broths. Dehydrated vegetables and broth bases don't get the attention that whole freeze-dried produce gets, but they're a genuinely efficient long-term item. Dehydrated vegetable flakes and powdered or cubed broth bases, properly sealed, can last 10 to 20 years. Removing moisture is again the core mechanism, and because these are often processed into flakes or powder, they take up very little storage space for the amount of use they provide. Food storage industry data shows dehydrated vegetable products growing steadily in the emergency and long-term food category, largely because they're lightweight and space-efficient compared to canned alternatives. I started keeping dehydrated onion and dehydrated carrot flakes specifically because fresh versions of both spoil so quickly in my kitchen, and I hated throwing them out. The dehydrated versions get used in soups and stews constantly, and I never worry about them going bad before I get to them. If you're building this into your pantry, look for vacuum-sealed or Mylar packaged options for the best shelf life, and use them anywhere you'd normally use fresh vegetables in a cooked dish. They rehydrate quickly in broths and sauces. This is a space-efficient way to keep vegetable flavor and nutrition on hand without worrying about spoilage timelines. Item number 19. Pemmican-style preserved meat mixes. This one is a deeper cut, but it's had a genuine resurgence among people who take long-term food storage seriously. Pemmican, a traditional mix of dried powdered meat combined with rendered fat, was historically used by indigenous peoples and later explorers because of its extraordinary shelf life, sometimes years, without refrigeration. The combination of removing moisture from the meat and sealing it in fat creates an environment that resists spoilage remarkably well. Historical and anthropological food preservation references describe pemmican as one of the most calorie-dense, longest-lasting traditional food preservation methods ever developed, predating modern refrigeration by centuries. I tried making a small batch at home using dried beef and rendered tallow, and while it's not something I'd eat daily, it's stored exactly as described. No spoilage, no odd smell, for well over a year at room temperature. If you're interested in this method, the process requires fully dehydrating the meat first and using genuinely rendered fat, not just any oil, since the fat itself acts as the sealing agent. This isn't for everyone, but it's one of the most calorie-efficient storage foods that exists. This is the kind of item that shows how much preservation knowledge existed long before modern food technology, and how much of it still works today. Item number 20. Bouillon cubes and powdered seasoning blends. The last item on this list is one people already own without realizing how long it actually lasts. Bouillon cubes and powdered seasoning blends, kept sealed and dry, can remain usable for years past their printed date, often 5 years or more, with only a gradual decline in flavor intensity, not safety. The high salt content in most bouillon products acts as a natural preservative, similar to the role salt plays throughout this entire list. Food manufacturer guidance and culinary sources. Both note that seasoning blends and bouillon are among the most forgiving pantry items in terms of long-term usability, precisely because of their salt and dehydration combination. I found a box of bouillon cubes in the back of a cabinet that had to be at least 4 years old. I used them in a soup, added a little extra for flavor since they'd mellowed slightly, and nobody at the table noticed anything different. If you're stocking seasoning and flavor bases, keep them sealed tightly, since moisture is what causes clumping and flavor loss over time, not spoilage. A slightly weaker flavor just means using a bit more per recipe, nothing more concerning than that. This is a small, low-cost item that quietly extends your ability to make bland, long-term staples like rice and beans actually taste like real meals. Closing. If you look at everything on this list, the pattern becomes obvious. The foods that last the longest are almost always the ones with the least moisture and the least processing done to them right before storage. Salt, sugar, rice, beans, dried grains, none of these need anything fancy to protect them, they just need to stay dry and sealed. Most people are spending money replacing food that never needed replacing, while ignoring how easy it is to build a genuinely resilient pantry with items that are already cheap and already sitting on grocery store shelves. That's the real insider knowledge here. It's not about buying something exotic, it's about understanding what you already have access to. This isn't about panic buying or clearing out a grocery store. It's about being the person who quietly prepared, while everyone else scrambles later, wondering why they didn't think of it sooner. Most people will notice these patterns eventually, but by then, prices will already have moved, and the smart move will already be behind them. You don't want to be the person caught off guard when everyone else suddenly wants what you already have. This is about protecting your budget and your family, calmly, without drama, using information that's been available the whole time. If this opened your eyes even a little, hit subscribe because I'm going to keep pulling back the curtain on the things nobody else is explaining clearly. Drop a comment and tell me which item on this list actually shocked you the most. And if you want to stay ahead of the next shift before everyone else catches on, stick around because there's a lot more coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.